Nicholas II Alexandrovich Romanov was last emperor of all Russia. In Russian Orthodox Church was canonized in a year 2000 as Saint Nicholas the Passion Bearer, or in Russian, Святой страстоте рпец Nikolai. During his reign, Nicholas engaged in a series of reforms, including introduction of civil liberties, literacy programs, and initiatives for empire's infrastructure modernization. However, we should go back a bit further in the past to grasp this incredible story of the last Russian Tsar before his abdication in March 1917, thereby ending the Romanovs dynasty 3 centuries-long reign over Russia. The year is 1884. Nikolas' coming-of-age ceremony was held at the Winter Palace, place where he pledged his loyalty to his father Alexander III, following his accession to the throne 3 years earlier. Later that year, Nikolas' uncle, Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, married Princess Elizabeth, daughter of Ludwig IV, Grand Duke of Hesse, and Princess Alice of the United Kingdom, granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Then 16-year-old Nikolas met for the first time bride's youngest sister, 12-year-old Princess Alex of Hesse. Encounter that will bond their lives forever. Admiration became affection. Affection turned to love, at least for Nikolas. He proposed to her in 1894 during Nikolas' visit to Coburg, Germany, for a wedding of Alex's older brother. Alex was hesitant to the idea to convert to Christian Orthodoxy and refused proposal at first. As that was not enough, Nikolas' parents were not so enthusiastic about this marriage neither. German side was, however, impatient to see this marriage happen. They saw building of political ties with Russian Empire as strategically vital for German interests in Europe. So the Kaiser insisted. It is Alex's duty to accept the proposal. When we are at the subject, it is extremely important to point out that Nikolas was primarily German, British, and Danish descent. His last ethnically Russian ancestor being Grand Duchess Anna Petrovna of Russia, daughter of Peter the Great, generations ago. But soon everything will be turned on its head due to Emperor's Alexander III's health getting ever worse, resulting in his death at the beginning of November 1894. Nikolas was not prepared to take over the throne. However, first thing he did as heir apparent was to appoint his own wedding. Only 3 weeks after his father's death, he married Alex, who converted to Orthodox Christianity and adopted new name, Alexandra Fedorovna Romanov. On 26th of May 1896, Nicholas' formal coronation as Emperor of all Russia was held in Uspensky Cathedral within Kremlin walls. He ascended as a Tsar. However, very soon the sequence of failures and defeats will ignite the wheel of destiny, which will end up in one of the bloodiest tragedies of 20th century. During his official visit to the United Kingdom in 1893, he observed the House of Commons in a debate session, and seemingly he was immensely impressed by the concept of parliamentary monarchy. He then obviously started to contemplate the idea of would it be possible to implement this concept in Russia. But Russia had entirely different inner structure to Britain on so many levels. Economically, they were in feudal age. Infrastructure due to huge distances was a big problem, and he was so aware of this. During his father's last years, in 1891, a construction of Trans-Siberian Railway started, and Nikolas was involved in this project from the very beginning. Line was planned to connect St. Petersburg and Moscow with Russian Far East, city of Vladivostok. Project itself was designated as vital for modernization of the whole empire. With a length of 9,289 kilometers from Moscow to Vladivostok, it is the third longest railway line in the world. Today, that is. It soon became symbol of his reign, and in 1916 they reached Vladivostok. With many difficulties, he finally finished his legacy project. That, however, didn't solve many problems he was facing politically. Between his aristocracy and peasantry, there was third party appearing on the horizon. As a result of intensified industrial development, emerging working class brought along new player to the stage: Communist Party of Russia. On international arena in Europe, empires are setting up the stage for a great war. Despite all this, Nikolas had ambitions himself to make a bigger impact in promoting Hague Peace Conference, trying to advocate termination of arms race and setting up mechanisms for a peaceful settlement of all international disputes. Nikolas got even nominated for Nobel Peace Prize for his contribution. Nevertheless, British Empire, along with France and Russia from one side, and Austro-Hungarian Empire with Germany and Italy from the other, are gearing up for inevitable clash. Russian Empire, meanwhile, kept expanding its zone of influence on Far East. Empire of Japan had its own agenda and territorial ambitions laid down on both Chinese and Southeast Asia mainlands. British Empire was also aware of Russian military presence in the region and entered alliance with Japan, helping them with military hardware. Nikolas pursued hardline policies towards Manchuria and Korea, challenging Japan's empire, and had no intention to loosen up his stance. So war began, 9th of February 1904, with Japan's preemptive night attack on Russian Far East Fleet based at Port Arthur, Manchuria. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Japan's naval forces had obvious tactical advantage of surprise attack. Plus, entire Russian fleet was trapped in the corner with not much chance of maneuvers given the battle was happening in Port Arthur Bay. All other Russian naval forces, both Baltic and Black Sea fleets, were months away of sails from the conflict, and even at the time Baltic fleet made it finally to engage, defeat was inevitable. In 1905, Nikolas was forced to plead for peace. At city of Chisinau, now Chisinau, Republic Moldova, there was completely different ongoing tragedy. Local media, specifically newspapers Bessarabets, were fueling anti-Semitic narrative, resulting in riots, ending up in 49 deaths, more than 500 injured, and 1,500 homes burned to the ground in one day. This event spread a series of pogroms, affecting 64 towns including Odessa, Yekaterinoslav, Kiev, Chisinau, Simferopol, Romny, Kremenchug, Nikolaev, Chernigov, Kamenets-Podolsky, Yelizavetgard, and 626 small towns and villages, mostly in Ukraine and Bessarabia. Officially, Nikolas condemned these events. His government dismissed regional governor and processed perpetrators by the court. Russian Orthodox Church also condemned anti-Semitic pogroms. Appeals to the faithful condemning the pogroms were read publicly in all churches of Russia. January 9, 1905, priest and labor leader Georgy Gapon commenced peaceful procession to St. Petersburg and Winter Palace in order to hand workers' petition to the Tsar. Goal was to raise question of increasingly hot topic of labor rights in modernizing empire. Converging processions coming from various parts of country met at the gates of St. Petersburg. Protesters carried religious icons and banners, as well as national flags and portraits of the Tsar. There was no sign of confrontation with the troops once they reached the city. Nikolas wrote in his diary, "Troops have been brought from the outskirts to reinforce the garrison. Up to now, the workers have been calm. Their number is estimated at 120,000. At the head of this union is a kind of socialist priest named Gapon. Commander of the garrison tried to stop them. Georgy Gapon showed workers' petition he was carrying. Troops fired warning salvos, and protesters tried to breach blockade of the Winter Palace, and eventually troops opened fire. The official number of victims was 92 dead and several hundred wounded. Gapon vanished, and the other leaders of the march were seized. The world was changing with a massive pace. New dawn of industrialization brought new elites. Main instrument in this clash between old aristocracy and new liberal elite was common people. Liberal opposition was promising more civil liberties, working class rights, and economic prosperity. Lenin's Bolsheviks printed massive amounts of pamphlets, weekly magazines, and newspapers, and sales of it alone became a considerable source of funding the party itself. Government was losing media war to opposition. In the midst of Russo-Japanese war, during October 1905, a revolution started. Barricades, street fighting, terrorist acts resulted in more than 9,000 people dead. These tragic circumstances forced Nikolas to major political concessions. Later that year, Emperor's government adopted de facto multi-party system. Nikolas finally understood hard way that empire desperately needs political reforms. In the hindsight, little too late. In that moment, he already was losing grounds in international affairs as well within country. He lost a decade in his petulant, reluctant stance towards political reforms. 12 years already passed since he visited House of Commons of Great Britain. Duma's first assembly was opened 27th of April, 1906. In the October Manifesto, Tsar pledged to introduce basic civil liberties, provide for broad participation in the state of Duma, and appointed Duma with legislative and oversight powers. He was determined, however, to preserve his autocracy even in the context of reforms. This was signaled in the text of the 1906 Constitution. He was described as supreme autocrat and retained sweeping executive powers, also in church affairs. His cabinet ministers were not allowed to interfere with nor assist one another. They were accountable only to him. Relation between Nikolas and State Duma was, well, complicated and poor. In his mind, Duma was a theater act with more advisory role. Deputies of Duma, however, had different perception of their role. They issued Address to the Throne, document which formulated demands of free elections, radical reforms, release of all political prisoners, and the right of Duma to appoint government and its ministers. However, Stolypin was assassinated shortly in 1911. Even Lenin admitted that if reforms set by Peter Stolypin succeeded, revolution would be impossible. If we go through numbers, it will immediately become clear what he was referring to. Russian Empire at the beginning of 20th century was developing with pace. Industrialization began to gather momentum, changing along sociological structure of the society. Economy was, however, still predominantly agricultural. Agricultural industry was covering massive 56% of empire's GDP. Regarding world grain export, Russia was dominant producer with 40% stake of global market. Per industrial output, Russian Empire was fifth country in the world, trailing US, Germany, Great Britain and France. Production of electricity, however, was only at the beginning of the development, and Russian Empire in 1906 was producing 60 times less electricity than US. Step by step, that was soon to be dramatically changed due to Stolopin's plan to boost electricity production. Economic growth was among the highest in the world, with 8% per year. Annual export was year in, year out larger than annual import, resulting in constant increase of gold reserves. To put all this into perspective, butter export alone returned more profit than gold mining, and Russian Empire was world's leader in gold production. Empire's gold reserves covered more than 100% of currency primary emission. Good old times when money was controlled by gold standard. At the same time, Germany's currency was roughly 49% backed by gold. Empire was investing heavily in education, with plans set to eradicate illiteracy by 1920. New schools, hospitals, cinemas and theaters are being built all over the country. It is quite hard to talk about capitalism or democracy as systematically introduced system in Russian Empire of the time. If it even existed, it lasted in a blink of an eye, more like a vague shape of what might have been. In any case, this was the actual backdrop of an event that followed and re-engineered Russia as a country, setting it as test polygon for the biggest experiment of collectivism in human history. Event that spread progressive ideology out to Asian continent and countries formerly known as East Europe. Event that stands as a milestone of 20th century. And this was my take for this episode. Please like, share and subscribe. It means a lot. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts on the matter in the comments down below. And if you really like this video, check out these other related stories. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!